Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me, as always, is Nora St. John. Nora, how are you doing this morning?
Quite well, Brian. We're having a little bit of technical issues over here on my end, but other than that, we seem to be fine. We're going to do a little bit of a short session today, I think, because of that.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
How are you doing?
Doing good. We started last week with a brand new platform, so hopefully this platform is going to be working. We are working out some technical difficulties. The nice thing about this is we're also going to have video that we can upload as well onto the YouTube channel, so you can see our wonderful faces if you choose to do so. But in case we want to show something, demonstrate, or show any pictures, this is a good opportunity that we have an option that we can do that through this medium. So, and also for our friends across the pond in both directions that want to watch us on YouTube, that want to watch closed captions, it gives them those options. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. So today we're going to cover sprains and strains. We were going to do just ankle sprains. I think we're going to cover that next week. I think let's lay down some groundwork and a foundation and just try and get through sprains and strains and see where we get with that.
Excellent.
All right. So today's going to be a shorter session, and that's okay because I don't think this is going to be too long of a discussion. So let's jump right in. So many people have come to me and said, hey, I torqued my back. I pulled it. I sprained it. I strained it. And they don't really know what they're talking about. Let's face it. There's not a diagnosis saying you tweaked something.
Right.
So
Right.
Let's talk about true diagnosis here of the difference between a sprain and a strain.
So let's start with that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Again, strain and sprain unfortunately sound a lot alike. So that's just a problem.
Yes.
It is.
Yes. We're going to stumble over this a little bit. I have a feeling.
That one little consonant can make us trouble. So a strain usually refers to muscle tissue damage. Right? So if I have a muscle strain and I'll have a ligament sprain.
Right.
So yes, and now the challenge there, of course, is those tissues are quite related. So a strain, right, can be in the muscle belly itself. It can be at the musculotendinous junction. We talked, last week about tendonitis and tendinosis. So if you think about it, fascia, there's this continuity from the connective tissue of the tendon through the musculotendinous junction, where the muscles and the tendon come together, through to the muscle belly itself. So, and it's funny, we call tendonitis a tendonitis or a tendinosis, right? So again, a strain is generally considered to be in the belly of the muscle, or more in the muscle tissue than in the tendinous tissue or any associated ligaments in that joint or around that joint area.
What's interesting with this is if it's in the muscular tendinous junction, it could easily be diagnosed as either the tendonitis,
yes,
or a muscular strain.
Yes.
It can sort of go back and forth. And I mean, I've seen one start as a strain and then eventually sort of creep into becoming more tendonitis oriented.
Absolutely. Because again, these are not separate tissues.
Right.
We've talked about this on and off, and certainly we've talked about fascia. These tissues are completely interconnected. The muscle tissue, and to take it a little more specifically, a little more technically, right, the fascial coating around each of the muscle fibers, and then each of the paramecium, et cetera, all of those really come down and merge to form that tendon and the connective tissue within the tendon, right? All that is continuous. So obviously, if there's damage in the muscle, or in the muscle belly, for example, there's also going to be a related experience in those tendinous tissues because they're continuous in terms of the fascia.
Now, when someone says that they've torn a muscle, could they be talking about a muscle strain? We talked last time, I've torn, the muscle in my forearm tendon and the flexor tendon, pulled a little bit of it off the bone. So that's completely different. But if you did say cause slight muscle tear within the belly of the muscle, would that be considered a muscular strain?
Yes.
Okay, so that is.
Right? Yes. So, and again, that's where things get fuzzy. Like I think about what you just said, which is essentially an avulsion fracture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the tendon pulls off something. Or I
Mm-hmm.
think about a number of clients I've worked with who have a tear at the musculotendinous junction between the gastroc and the Achilles tendon,
Right.
which is a
Right.
really pretty common spot to have a little bit of a tear.
Yep.
And, is that, I mean, it's not in the tendon necessarily, it's not in the muscle belly, it's kind of in between the two. So is it a muscle strain or is it a tendon tear?
Right.
I'm not sure exactly where that, how they delineate that, or even if they can delineate that, those kinds of things.
That's
Depending
what
on
I
the
was going to
case.
say. We've talked about things like sciatic, sort of this garbage diagnosis.
Right. Yeah.
I've kind of I know what a sprain is. When it comes to a
Yes.
strain, it's always in my head sort of like, well, they're not 100% sure. And unless you do imaging of some sort where you can actually see a tear, where you can see muscular damage, I often wonder if that gets that same sort of, I hate to use the term, but garbage diagnosis just as a catch-all for, well, it's not in the ligament, it's within the muscle, and especially if it's within the muscle belly. So we're going to call it a strain.
That's kind of how I see it, because it's really used, like I see it a lot in low back pain.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a low back strain, right?
Yes.
Whatever that means. I have a gastroc strain, I have a hamstring strain. And sometimes that's
Yep.
really what's happening. And, again, I think it sort of means we've ruled out the other things. I think it often means
Yep.
we've ruled out a tendonitis, we've ruled out some ligament damage. And so we're going to leave it as a strain. So I think I don't know, I think that's fair. Somebody else out there may have more insight into how the medical profession actually deals with this. But my experience has been when it's not obviously this or that, they kind of throw it in the strain bucket.
And I think way back when, let's talk 30 years ago, and even prior to that, they didn't have the same imaging and techniques that we do now. So now we could do
No.
ultrasound. Now we could do MRI, and we could actually see if there is tissue damage within the belly of the muscle. We could actually see that and diagnose that differently. The doctor may diagnose that as a slight tear or give you a more specific diagnosis rather than a strain. But previously, really, besides x-rays, there wasn't a whole lot more that they could do. So it was just like, it's in the muscle. You strained it. You pulled it.
Exactly. And then you get into muscle, or you get into ligament sprains.
Yeah.
But a sprain is specifically in the ligaments.
Yep.
And so that is a different tissue, right? The strain is more in the muscle, maybe into the tendon or some relationship there. And sprains are specifically in ligaments. So the ligaments that hold the knee together, the ligaments that hold
Yep.
the ankle together. People commonly sprain their ankles, or they sprain their thumbs. Like people get
Yep.
hand sprains in various ways, or wrist sprains because they land on it funny, or they, hyperextend it or something like that.
And let's look at anatomically,
Mhm.
just covering all bases here. When we're talking about tendon and muscle, it's usually the tendon attaches to the bone, to a muscle, whereas
Right.
ligament attaches a bone to a bone. So
Right.
and the main difference is that the ligament is avascular. You don't have much blood supply, if any blood supply, to a ligament, whereas to the tendon, because it's a muscle, there's a lot more blood supply there. So that's going to heal a lot more rapidly and essentially could be as good as new. There's a possibility that it could repair itself so that you won't even know. 2 years down the road, you're not even going to remember you had that muscle strain. But a ligament sprain, that's a different animal.
Right. And all of these there's different degrees too. So, just to bring that into it too, both for sprains and for strains, there's a sort of a grade 1 or whatever, where there's a few tissues torn, a few fibers torn, if you will, whether it's the muscle or it's the ligament. And then there's like a grade 2 or more of it is. And then there's also a complete rupture where you've actually torn the muscle in half, or you've torn the ligament in half, and it's no longer attached to itself. And those are also slightly different situations.
Right.
Remember too that ligaments are designed to be range limiters or range allowers, but basically they determine a lot of the stability of a joint. It's like, it's only going to let your elbow go so far. It's only going to let your knee go so far into extension. It's only going to let, your ankle move so far if it rolls over. right? That's what the
Yeah.
ligament is going to limit that.
I love
So
that
when
term.
yeah. So when you lose ligament, you lose some stability around that joint.
Yeah, that's how I
Right.
learned a lot more about ligament structures is, like you said, there's the grades. Grades
Yeah.
1, first time someone sprains something, usually it'll come back to almost as good as new. It's a grade 1 sprain so it's not that big a deal. It'll often, return back to fairly as normal.
Yeah.
Upon repetition, continuously spraining over and over and over again can lead to a grade 2, a grade 3, where even though you don't even have a complete rupture, you can actually have it be so loose that the ligament is stretched out so far that you lack stability in that joint from there on in. It never returns back to its original length.
Right. One thing I think, like I use an image, and I use this on Brand. I've done some video work together where, like, if you think about a ribbon, okay, you've got a ribbon, and if you cut a little piece of that ribbon, right, that it doesn't change length too much.
Mm-hmm.
If you cut halfway through, you'll be able to stretch it a little bit farther, just because some of those fibers are going to end up now being able to go a little farther than they were. And the more you cut it, the longer that ligament will get. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Until it's completely torn. So, and some of that damage, like some of it will, like ligaments will heal, or they can heal to some extent. They can scar up a bit anyway.
Sure.
Right. So if you have a little tiny tear, it can scar up, perhaps the body does some healing in that process, and that can tighten it back up again. And for some people it does. For some people it doesn't. Or for some people the damage is extreme enough that they really lose the stability of that ligament. It happens a lot in the knee. Think about intercruciate ligament sprains, sprains, or medial ligament sprains, or ankle sprains.
Seen that a lot.
Any of those circumstances can lead to lack of stability in those joints.
Well, we see it a lot also in the SI joint ligaments.
Yes. Yep.
Because especially upon pregnancy, I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone the first time they get pregnant with the relaxin, those ligaments stretch out. And the first pregnancy, oftentimes from what I've seen, they go back to about where they were before, and everything seems to be happy and healthy.
Yeah.
But upon the second and third and fourth child, again, repetition, that even though it has relaxin, it's stretching it out, but it doesn't always go back in. I say it's like two puzzle pieces that were supposed to be locked perfectly together.
Yes.
Now are kind of crooked. They're not going back 100%.
Yep.
And those ligament structures don't tighten up as much as maybe they once did. And now they have one side or the other is a little looser. One side may be a little bit dysfunctional. So we see that in a lot of clients or a lot of women who have had multiple births.
Absolutely. Now, the SI joint's a really classic example of a ligament sprain. And really, it can be acute. This, as you said, with pregnancy, or even with ligaments develop, and the length of the ligament develops as we grow up, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of joint shape or joint mobility is formed by what we're doing when we're growing up. So I think about a lot of the dancers that I work with, or I think of the pitchers too, those two things, or tennis players, where a large range of motion is required in certain areas, right? So for a pitcher, it's your shoulder. For dancers, typically your hips. And, if you start at the age of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, doing a whole lot of mobility work to get hip extension, which as a dancer you would do, or to get external rotation of your shoulder if you're a pitcher, over time, that the ligament structure will adapt to that work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Right. So that also can lead to how the ligaments develop is often related to, how you grow up. So then once you get an injury, a lot of that just either can compound that, or not, because you create the ligament structure of your adulthood as you're growing up.
Yeah, we see this a lot in baseball pitchers who need Tommy John surgery, that ulnar collateral ligament. They're pitching. If you've ever seen a pitcher or even a volleyball player, the amount of external rotation that their arm can go back so far, well, eventually the humerus is going to stop. Mm-hmm. But at that young an age, things are still stretching. They're still sort of mobile, and I almost want to say a little more elastic than they would be if they were in their 20s or 30s. And that ulnar collateral ligament. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're still modeling. They're still remodeling at that age. So if you keep torquing it, that ulnar collateral ligament can continue to stretch. And then when they are in their 20s, when they are pitching at a higher level, they're still requiring and asking so much of that stretch that
Yeah.
eventually they have very little control in their pitch. And that's what happens is they say, I don't
Mm.
feel bad, but I feel a little unstable. And
Uh-huh.
they suddenly aren't having the same amount of control as they're releasing the ball because that stability in their elbow is not there anymore. And again,
Yeah.
it just over time. And it wasn't a trauma. It wasn't something that happened like they fell
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
like an ankle sprain often happens with more of a trauma. This is almost self-imposed. And you see it again. I see it a lot with baseball pitchers who started pitching at a high level and started throwing curves and things like that when they were probably a little too young. We're talking 11, 12, 13 years old, where, like you said, those ligaments are still remodeling. All the tissues are at that age.
Yeah. Your bones aren't finished. So everything has to accommodate, right, to whatever you're
Exactly.
doing to it. And with dancers, the challenge is typically in the anterior hip.
Yes.
So labrum tears and that kind of thing are not uncommon in dancers, and just hip instability generally, because a lot of mobility is required for the task.
Yeah.
So ligaments again are shaped by your activity, and then when you damage it, that also can again change that stability of the joint. And with a ligament, like when a muscle is damaged, the muscle is going to keep working on that area, right? Like the
Right.
muscle, like if it loses stability, that muscle is going to contract a little bit more typically. And if it scars
Mhm.
up, it's going to contract a little bit more to create that stability back in that muscle and maybe over tighten it or whatever. But basically that's got a self-regulating mechanism, if you will, for a
Mhm.
strain. A sprain doesn't. Once that ligament is
Right.
a certain length, it's a certain length. That's what you got. And the
And that's
muscle
the whole thing that I would say before. With a muscle, you're going to have some healing. The muscle
yes,
will heal. It's got a ton of blood,
designed
flowing.
for it.
It's designed to heal,
Mhm.
whereas the ligaments really aren't. They don't have that same blood supply to begin to heal as much as before, which is why when you do see a rupture, or, a grade rupture where it's 20%, 30%, whatever the percentage is, you rarely see on its own the whole thing knit back together. You rarely see the scarring up of that, you
Yeah.
know, it's just maybe, and I was going to ask you about this. If you've ever seen this, if you have something like that, where let's say of a teenager who is still remodeling and who does get a sprain, let's say a grade 2, where a portion of it is torn, would that be more likely because they are still developing, those tissues are remodeling? Would that have a tendency to want to knit together? Whereas my tissue, that's not going to happen, not at 50.
Well, the example that I'd use for that is actually my nephew,
Mhm.
who tore his ACL and had some meniscus damage in his knee when he was 11, I'm thinking. Right. So, and he had so he didn't have much ligament left in there if he had any at all, and meniscus trouble. And, he went on, there's a couple things that he's limited in.
Mhm.
But essentially his body accommodated to that really well. And he's
Mhm.
extremely athletic. So there's that too. But he really accommodated to it as he grew up. And he has, as far as I know, has had no knee issues. Now he might in the distant future.
Right.
But it's been 12 years or something since then.
Okay.
And he's had no issues at all, in spite of skiing and running and swimming and, all kinds of different sports that he's participated in.
Right. So in some regards, it may be the muscles that have stabilized the joint. It may be that there was some healing that happened in that
Yeah.
area or some
Yeah.
scarring up that occurred at that young an age. That
Yeah.
can happen. And
Yeah.
again, those tissues have, when we talked about fascia, we talked about those tissues have so much fluid. They are so hydrated when you're young. Whereas as we get older, there is literally a change in the amount of elastin, collagen, ground substance, hyaluronic acid, everything changes. And we see our tissues do get a lot drier. So, like I say, if I sprain my ankle right now, it's going to be a lot different than if my son does, who at
Yes.
16, he's going to snap back no matter how bad of a sprain it is. He's going to snap back a lot faster than I would.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at there. when we start to talk about more specific sprains and strains, we'll talk too about how you then stabilize those joints, right? Because a lot of it is if there is an instability caused by the change in the ligament length, then we're looking at how do you stabilize that joint using the musculature, and that's a lot of the theme of some of our next sessions as we go forward.
Yeah, and it's going to require a lot more muscle work.
Yes.
You know, when we're talking about low back SI joint issues, in order to stabilize that, we need to work the entire area. We need to make sure that that's going to be strong enough to be stable, to
Yes.
create that outer ring to provide, assistance to the inner portion. So it's
Exactly.
really at that point, not necessarily working from the inside out, but occasionally we do have to work from the outside in to help stabilize that,
Absolutely.
which is the weakest. So that makes, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then next week we'll talk specifically about ankle sprains, and that'll give you also some, using an actual case study, we can talk about how we stabilize that and what you do, and both from first aid through post rehab and through how you really get somebody back to full functioning when they're don't have all of the ligament stability they could have.
Yeah, because that's probably the one that most people are going to see. Besides SI joint ligaments, I'd say an ankle sprain is the one that you're probably going to see the most.
Yeah.
And it may be the one that you're going to have to happen to yourself, because I've had that happen to me. So we'll talk about that next week. And again, today was a much shorter session for many reasons, including technical difficulties on our part. But I think we laid a good groundwork. I think we laid some groundwork for where we're going to go with this. So we can talk in a lot greater detail next week about going into that ankle sprain, and down the road when we talk about SI joint dysfunction, we're definitely going to be covering this as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. So guys, thank you very much for joining us on our abbreviated session here of Moving Conversations. If you like what you hear, drop us a line at movingconvos@gmail.com. Remember, you can always reach us there. You can reach out to us on our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Moving Convos is what you look up on those things. If you really like what we're doing, subscribe, like, post, do all of that stuff for us. It's going to only help out for us to get out there and to reach more people. So we really appreciate every time someone does that. And, we'll see you guys next time.